So, we moved around a lot whenever I was a kid. We settled in Rhode Island when I was 8, and I was there until I went to college in Colorado Springs. And most of my memories are rooted in Rhode Island, but there are still some fragments in my brain, in the other homes that I lived in when I was a lot younger. Most of these memories are unclear, kind of pointless. Just chasing after another kid in the backyard of a house in North Carolina, trying to build a raft to float down the creek behind the apartment we rented in Pennsylvania, and so on. But there's one set of memories that remains clear as glass to me, as though they were just made yesterday. I often wonder whether these memories are simply just lucid dreams during the mono I had, but I don't know. We were living in a house just outside the bustling metropolis of New Vineyard, Maine, population 643. It was a pretty big house, to be fair, especially for a family of 3. There were a number of rooms that I didn't even see in the 5 months I was there. It was kind of a waste of space, but it was the only house available at the time, and Dad's job was pretty close. The day after my 5th birthday, it was only me and my parents. I came down with mono. It meant no rough play and more fever for at least another 3 weeks. And it really sucked. We were in the process of packing our things to move, and most of my things were already packed away in boxes, so my room was completely barren. My mom brought me ginger ale and books several times a day, and these served the function of being like my primary entertainment for the next few weeks. Boredom was always around, though, waiting to rear its ugly head. Just a lot of bed sitting and waiting. I don't really remember how I met Mr. Widemouth. I think it was like a week after I was diagnosed with mono. My first memory of the guy was asking him if he had a name, and he said, "Call me Mr. Widemouth," because his mouth was big. Everything was pretty big in comparison to his body, his head, his ears, his little eyes. But his mouth was by far the largest part. I told him he kind of looked like a Furby, and he didn't seem to know what it was. I told him, the little robot with big ears, but, he became a part of my imagination. I guess he just brushed it off. "You don't need one of those," he said. "They aren't the same as having a real friend." I remember Mr. Widemouth would disappear every time my mom stopped in to check on me. He told me that he laid under my bed, and he didn't want my parents to see him because he was afraid he wouldn't let us play anymore. And I was bored as hell, and I thought it was kind of weird, but it seemed worth it just to have a little bit of company, beyond the family. We didn't do much those first few days. Mr. Widemouth just looked at some of my books I had lying around, fascinated with the stories, pictures. The 3rd or 4th morning after I met him, he greeted me with a big smile on his face, and he said he had a new game to play. "We have to wait until your mom comes to check on you, because she can't see us play it. It's a secret game," he said. After my mom delivered some more books and soda, Mr. Widemouth slipped out from under the bed and tugged my hand. "We have to go to the room at the end of the hallway," he said. I didn't want to. My parents had told me to stay in your room. Could infect the place, but Mr. Widemouth kept on persisting, so I went with it. The room in question had no furniture or wallpaper. Its only distinguishing feature was a window opposite the doorway. Mr. Widemouth darted across the room and gave the window a push, flinging it open. He called me over, and we were on the 2nd story of the house. It was on a hill, and from this angle, the drop was farther than 2 stories. It was pretty far. "I like to play pretend up here," he was saying. "I pretend that there's a big, soft trampoline below this window, and I jump. And if you pretend hard enough, you bounce back up." He told me he wanted me to try. I was a 5-year-old with a fever, so only a hint of skepticism was in my brain. I told him it looked like a long drop, and he told me that's all part of the fun. It wouldn't be fun if it was only a short drop, and if it were that way, you may as well just bounce on a real trampoline. I thought of it. It just freaks me out now. picturing myself falling through the air only to bounce back up. But the realist in me prevailed. Maybe some other time, I said. I don't know if I have enough imagination. I could get hurt. Mr. Widemouth's face snarled. Just for a second, though. I saw he had some pretty sharp teeth. Anger gave way to disappointment, though. If you say so, he said. He spent the rest of my day under the bed, quiet as a mouse. The next morning, Mr. Widemouth brought in a box. And it was rattling. I want to teach you how to juggle, he said. I brought some things to practice with before I start giving you lessons. And it was full of knives. And I told him my parents are going to kill me. My parents would never let me touch knives back then. I got spanked even just for, wandering around with one after I saw Peter Pan. I always liked his little sword, but I don't know, I guess my mom has a thing against knives. Mr. Widemouth frowned. It's fun to juggle with these. I want you to try it. He was really insistent. But I pushed the box away. I can't, I'll get in trouble. They aren't safe. He started scowling then. He slithered under my bed, and he stayed there the rest of the day. I kinda wondered just how often he was under the bed at this point. I started having trouble sleeping after that. Mr. Widemouth often woke me up at night saying he put a real trampoline under the window, a big one I couldn't see in the dark. I always told him no and tried to go back to sleep, but he kept on asking. Sometimes he stayed at my bedside until the morning. He wasn't really very fun to play with anymore. My mom came to me one morning and told me I could walk around outside. She thought the fresh air would be good for me, especially after being confined in my room for so long. Ecstatic, I put on my sneakers, trotted out the back porch, and Mr. Widemouth was already there. I have something I want you to see, he said, and I definitely gave him a weird look at this point, but he said it's safe, I promise. So, I followed him to the beginning of a deer trail, which ran through the woods behind the house. It's an important path, he said. I've had a lot of friends about your age. When they were ready, I took them down this path. You aren't ready yet, but one day I hope I can take you there. I wondered what was down that trail, but he just kind of went off into the woods and I went back into the house. 2 weeks after I met Mr. Widemouth, the last load of our things had been packed into the moving truck. I'd be in the cab of the truck, sitting next to my dad, for the long drive to Pennsylvania. I considered telling Mr. Widemouth, but even at 5 years old, I was beginning to suspect that he wouldn't mind. My dad and I were in the truck at 4 a.m. He was hoping to make it to Pennsylvania by tomorrow. With a bunch of coffee and 6-pack energy drinks, he seemed more like a man who was about to run a marathon than one that was about to spend 2 days in a truck. Early enough for you, kid? My dad asked me, maybe with a hint of sympathy. I nodded, put my head against the window. I was trying to get some sleep. He told me it's the last move. I know it's been hard for you, as sick as you've been. Once I get promoted, we can settle down and you can make some real friends. I opened my eyes as we backed up the driveway. I saw Mr. Widemouth's silhouette in my bedroom window. He was just standing there until the truck was about to turn onto the main road. He gave a little wave goodbye. I didn't wave back. Years later, I was back in New Vineyard, just passing through. The piece of land our house stood on was empty except for the foundation. It burned down a few years after we left. Out of curiosity, though, I popped by and I checked out that deer trail. Part of me was expecting Mr. Widemouth to jump out from behind a tree and scare the shit out of me, but I don't know, I just kind of feel like he's gone, tied to the house, The trail ended at the New Vineyard Memorial Cemetery. I saw that there was a lot of kids' graves there.